Olá, olá, boa noite, pessoal. Tudo bem? Aqui quem fala é o Thiago Vitorino. Faço parte do Product Tank Florianópolis e hoje estamos aí para organizar mais uma edição do Product Tank Brasil. Hoje a gente tem a presença aí do Ken Sandy, que vai falar um pouquinho com a gente sobre 5 Key Questions to Define Your Customer. 5 principais perguntas, né, para ajudar a gente a definir nossos usuários, clientes. Então, hoje a gente está organizando a segunda edição do evento do Product Tank a nível Brasil. A gente teve uma edição no começo do ano passado, em maio, e hoje a gente está fazendo aí uma segunda edição onde a gente mobilizou todos os Product Tanks aí do Brasil para trazer esse conteúdo. Eu vou, então, puxar uma apresentaçãozinha aqui para trazer um pouco mais de contexto para vocês. Então, beleza, vamos lá. Então, hoje, né, apresentando aqui o meetup dessa noite, do Product Tank Brasil. Antes de tudo, falar um pouquinho sobre o Mind the Product, que é quem está por trás disso tudo, né? O Mind the Product, ele é uma maior comunidade de produto do mundo, no sentido de ter muitos capítulos espalhados pelo mundo todo e também muito tempo já no mercado aí produzindo conteúdo. O Mind the Product, ele tem diversas iniciativas, tem a própria comunidade, que eu vou falar um pouquinho mais em detalhe, que é o Product Tank. Tem a questão da membership, que eles criaram recentemente, que dá acesso a algumas vantagens em relação ao conteúdo e acesso a mentorias. Tem a própria parte de conteúdo, que eu acredito que boa parte das pessoas que talvez não estejam tão familiarizadas com o Mind the Product ou o Product Tank devem conhecer, por já ter esbarrado aí algum artigo do blog deles sobre gestão de conteúdo, gestão de produto. Tem muita coisa, muito artigo bom deles no blog. Organizam eventos também, que é a conferência, né, global do Mind the Product, e tem treinamentos que eles também fazem para a comunidade. Então, entrando um pouquinho em detalhes ali, como eu falei, o Mind the Product é a organização que gerencia, né, que tá por trás do Product Tank, que é essa comunidade que hoje conta aí com mais de 200 cidades, né, no mundo todo, mais de 150 mil membros aí espalhados nessas comunidades. Então, como eu falei também antes, organiza algumas conferências anuais, aqui algumas das cidades, né, Hamburgo, Londres, Manchester, São Francisco e na Singapura, e agora também começou com meetups digitais, né, no ano passado, se não me engano já tiveram 2 ou 3 edições da conferência do Mind the Product, né, na versão digital, o que é interessante porque antes era menos acessível, né, você tinha que se deslocar até uma dessas cidades para ter acesso aos conteúdos e aos palestrantes, e hoje a gente consegue ter acesso a isso de forma mais fácil, através desses eventos digitais, então vale a pena acompanhar também. A questão de conteúdo, como eu falei, eles têm um portal ali com um quadro de vagas bem ativo e também o blog, com vários conteúdos relevantes aí da área, né? Newsletter, comunidade do Slack e um podcast também. Então, vale a pena, para quem não conhece, acompanhar algumas das iniciativas aí do Mind the Product. Tá? Explicando um pouquinho mais sobre o Product Tank, né? As comunidades. Então, como eu falei, são mais de 200 aí espalhadas pelo mundo todo. Aqui, o mapa mais atual, peguei ele hoje, do site deles ali, enfim, dá para ver que tem uma presença bem grande aí na Europa, América do Norte, enfim, mas dos outros cantos do mundo também. E no Brasil, a gente também está com uma rede aí, uma quantidade de comunidades bem relevante, bem expressiva. Então hoje a gente conta aí com, agora tá me perdi na conta aqui, 11 comunidades. A gente tinha 8 ano passado, eu lembro, quando a gente organizou o World Product Day em maio, a gente estava em 8, agora a gente já está com 11, então tem 3 novas comunidades aí que surgiram de lá para cá, que é Lages, João Pessoa e São Luís, né? Então é legal vendo aí mais comunidades surgindo, principalmente aí nas regiões norte, nordeste, aí. E enfim, né, hoje a gente tem aí capítulos em Floripa, que é onde eu faço parte hoje, Joinville, Lages, em Santa Catarina, Curitiba, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Campo Grande, Belo Horizonte, Recife, João Pessoa e São Luís. Então é bacana ver aí as comunidades crescendo, mais Product Tanks surgindo aí no Brasil, e principalmente, eu particularmente fico bem feliz em ver a gente nessa mobilização de estar organizando esses meetups a nível nacional, né? Acho que a gente tem bastante vantagem nesse sentido de conseguir uma abrangência maior, levar esse conteúdo, quando forem conteúdos relevantes, levar isso aí para mais cantos do Brasil. Então, é isso aqui, só mostrando também o que eu comentei anteriormente da outra iniciativa que a gente teve, né, do Product Tank Brasil no ano passado. Então, foi no World Product Day, que acontece normalmente em maio, tá? É um evento que daí o Product Tank organiza com todos os, enfim, ele incentiva que todos os Product Tanks, né, do mundo realizem evento no mesmo dia, por isso World Product Day. Daí, no ano passado, a gente fez essa edição com todos os Product Tanks do Brasil, foi bem bacana, a gente conseguiu trazer bastante gente, foi um evento relativamente longo aí, mas a gente conseguiu trazer bastante conteúdo aí, 7 pessoas. Também tentamos trazer pessoas aí de cantos diferentes do Brasil para trazer mais diversidade. Beleza, então tá explicado aí um pouquinho sobre o Mind the Product, sobre o Product Tank, para quem não conhecia, acredito que quem já participa dos meetups já ouviu bastante essa introdução, mas vamos ao evento da noite, então. Hoje a gente tem aí a presença do Ken Sand, vou falar um pouquinho sobre sobre a biografia dele mais para frente, mas ele vai trazer essa palestra, né, 5 Key Questions to Define Your Customer, e, enfim, agradecendo aí já de antemão ao Ken pela disponibilidade, pela presença, agradecer também ao Guido, que é o coordenador do Product Tank da América Latina, que nos ajudou também na conexão com o Ken, né, para conseguir organizar esse evento. Então, rapidinho aqui sobre a agenda. Tem essa abertura aqui e apresentação do Product Tank Brasil, que está acontecendo neste momento. Assim que eu terminar aqui, que já está quase no fim, eu vou apresentar o Ken e ele vai trazer a palestra aí para a gente sobre 5 Key Questions to Define Your Customer. Em seguida, assim que ele terminar, a gente vai abrir para um bloco aí de perguntas e respostas, então fiquem à vontade para ir jogando suas perguntas aí no chat, tá? Se quiser mandar em inglês, pode mandar em inglês. Se quiser mandar em português, sentir mais à vontade, manda em português. Eu tento traduzir na hora ali para ele. E lembrando que a partir do momento que o Ken entrar, a gente vai mudar para inglês. Ele vai apresentar tudo em inglês, sem tradução simultânea. E isso também se aplica para perguntas e respostas. Bom, é isso. Obrigado aí, pessoal, pela atenção. Vou aqui chamar então o Ken, mas antes uma breve introdução para explicar um pouco mais sobre ele, tá? Então, o Ken, ele possui uma extensa carreira liderando times de gestão de produto e tecnologia, né, nos últimos 20 anos na região do Vale do Silício. Ele tem experiência com times em fases de alto crescimento, early stage, até grandes empresas em processo de transformação digital. Ele já atuou como VP de produto na Masterclass e na Lynda.com, que são grandes players aí do mercado de educação online, né? Anteriormente, ele já atuou como executivo em empresas do segmento de publicidade, comunicação, mobile e redes sociais. Todas essas experiências ele atuou na definição, lançamento e gestão dos produtos web e mobile, né, que foram utilizados por milhões de pessoas em mais de 60 países. É autor do livro The Influential Product Manager e hoje também é professor na Universidade de Berkeley, na Califórnia, onde ele ensina disciplinas de gestão de produto nos cursos de engenharia. Também trabalha como consultor e mentor para startups e scale-ups tanto na América do Norte como na Europa. E, além disso, palestra regularmente em conferências e encontros de gestão de produto, e esse é mais um deles. É isso, então já vou convidar o Ken para entrar e vou mudar para o inglês. So, shifting to English and inviting Ken to join us here. Hey.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, Ken.
Great
Fine.
to
How about
be
you?
here. I'm doing wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the warm welcome. Well, I assume it was a warm welcome. I didn't understand it, but of course. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. I'm actually currently in Melbourne, Australia, and so I'm coming all the way over the ocean to join you today. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, same. I'm very glad to have you here. Thank you for being here at this time. I know it's morning for you, so
yeah, no problem.
Yeah. But again, thank you. I'm very excited for the content. One thing that I was thinking about before the event is that when we were promoting it, I saw a lot of coworkers and people from my LinkedIn community and connections from other areas, not only from product management, because the topic is very broad, right? Is when you talk about defining your customer, that's not only relevant for product, but for the entire organization, right? So that was something interesting that I perceived, and so I hope that there are a lot of people there from other areas that will benefit from the content as well. So
absolutely. Look, I think a lot of the content that I like to talk about is really about, well, being an influential product manager is about how you collaborate with other parts of the organization and really bring the skills, all the diverse skills that you have together to solve a problem together. And your role as product manager is to collaborate very, very well with a broad set of people. So it's not surprising to me that these are relevant questions to people in engineering, people in UX, business, any investors, any sorts of parts involved in the organization fundamentally want to know, what is it we're solving? Why are we solving it? Who are we solving it for? Why is this something that I should spend my time of my life doing? And so these are very, very important questions to be able to answer. And I often see the product manager's role as leading that effort and really facilitating the process. So I'm a big fan of not making it complicated, trying to involve people, and also trying to kind of do it in a way that exposes your team members to your thought process, so they can really understand how you arrived at the answer, not just sort of, here's the answer, let's go off and do this. So it's a very important skill. So I'm not surprised to hear and welcome everybody who is joining, not just product managers.
Awesome. Okay, so without further ado, feel free to share your presentation.
Absolutely.
And the stage is yours.
Thank
you again.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just going to share my screen, and what you should see is a full page full page. If you don't see it, please let me know. But as I said, very, very excited to be here. Author of The Influential Product Manager. At the end of the presentation, I will give you a little bit more details about where you can potentially find the book if you're interested. I will jump straight into just saying, today we're going to talk about like the 5 key questions to define your customer. This is something that's important to do before you start defining and implementing a solution, is to really ensure that you've got a very clear understanding about your customer and the problem you're intending to solve. Today, I'm going to give you tips on the 5 questions you need to ask. What are the specific 5 questions that I find are essential to ask? Some ideas of different templates or frameworks that you can use to help craft answers to these questions. And then how to turn those sorts of questions into compelling value propositions and differentiation statements that can really communicate the benefits of your solution to your prospective customers. So starting off with just to give you an idea about in which space are we operating today. Now, I'm not so naive to think that product development is just a linear process where you have an idea and you go through step by step all the way to launching and optimizing a product in the market. But it is helpful to think about new product development or new large improvements to existing products as more or less going through 5 phases. That is starting off with discovery, moving into your definition and understanding the problem. So discovery is opportunity identification. Define is understanding the problem. Design is where you come up with a potential solution and evaluate that solution. Deliver is developing and launching that solution. And then a step that's often forgotten about, and that's coming back to a product that's actually in market, measuring it, evolving it, and optimizing it. So if you think about these 5 phases, it more or less goes through different steps where you're defining the problem through to delivering and actually solving that problem in the market. And if you think about where we spend so much of our time, we spend so much of our time all the way at this end, where we're really focusing on making sure that we're building the product right. We're working with the engineering, we're making sure our requirements are clear, our scope is clear, we're getting ready for launch, and we're putting a product to the market. And what often happens, of course, is the product doesn't quite necessarily do the trick. It doesn't solve a problem, may not make as much money, and we're wondering what happened. And that is because we don't spend, in my opinion, enough time as in our product management craft to make sure that we're building the right product. And that's where I'm going to be speaking today, is sort of in that discover and define phase, making sure that we've deeply understood our customer and understand the problem that we're actually solving before we move into solutions. Now, you'll all be familiar, I'm sure, with the design thinking model. This is another useful tool just to think about where it is that we're operating today. We discover at the beginning. You then will be in this sort of very convergent thinking at the beginning, where you're trying to understand customer needs. And then you might define a problem where you converge again. So that's what design thinking is pretty much all about, is this divergent, convergent, divergent, convergent thinking kind of model. In that early stage, it's very important to build that empathy, make sure that you're structuring your conversations with your customers so you're understanding them well, the context they live, and being able to define problems to actually solve. Now, why go to this trouble? I don't think anyone's going to deny that it's important to understand your customer, but when the rubber hits the road, we are talking about investing your time, your resources, and importantly, taking time out of pushing to build a solution to actually spend time on going and talking to customers. So it is an investment. And the investment, in my opinion, is worth it. If you're wanting to sort of have a couple of tips about how to explain why you should be given time to go through this discovery phase to stakeholders who are often very clear about what they want you to build and they just want you to get on with it. And that is the following tips. First of all, it helps you actually avoid opportunity costs later. So that investment up front, if you will, helps you uncover hidden assumptions that may undermine a later solution. It means that you can be sure that wherever you end up investing your time and your money, in particular your scarce development resources, in building solutions, that is going to be the right solution. So much of what we do is actually put out into the market is waste. There's some stats to say that something like 40% of what we build is ultimately not used or not actually going to create the value that we think it's going to create. So it's important to sort of talk about not just this cost of having to spend time through discovery. The benefit is avoiding that much larger opportunity cost later of doing the wrong thing. Secondly, by spending time defining the problem and being able to empathize with the customer and articulate precisely the customer building, you create clarity. You help your team really understand precisely what the problem is that you're trying to solve. You align your stakeholders behind a precise definition of the problem, why it is important to solve, and what success will look like. Without establishing that common understanding early on, you may find that your product initiatives get kicked off and then disrupted because various stakeholders, whether they be your business stakeholders or your development team, are confused about what they're really supposed to be doing and why they're doing it. So providing that context really provides clarity and focus. A third benefit is that up front, you establish a set of principles around what you will be communicating to your customers. You will be very clear about, this is the problem we solve, why it is important to solve, and how it benefits you. This will be an important component that you will want to deliver into your product marketing organization. These will be the benefits that you aim to actually solve. It will help you prioritize work. It will help you be very clear about what you're wanting to test and validate with customers. So doing that upfront sets the platform by which you will ultimately communicate your product to your customers. And then internally, it allows you to set a baseline for defining success. If you and your stakeholders have very, very different ideas about what you're actually trying to solve and for whom, it becomes impossible to say what success is going to look like. And so you will find delivering a product into the market that you may think it's successful, you may have all this data to show it's successful, yet your stakeholders may be saying that it's not a success because it's solving a problem that they actually didn't think was important or they weren't aligned behind. What it is not is a pitch. It is important that whatever you do during discovery in terms of defining your customer is not about simply trying to get everybody to agree on the problem and trying to get everyone rallying behind a problem that you think is important, because you'll suffer confirmation bias. You'll spend all of your time trying to find data to support your assumptions, and you'll pitch a rosier picture than maybe what you will actually end up delivering. And so it's important to enter whatever this process of defining your customer, whatever you care to call it, discovery, or building empathy, or customer deriving insights. It's important that you're very objective during that process. And if you end up saying a product or a problem's not worth solving, that's okay. Sometimes we work out that something's not important to do. Now, you should probably have access to a chat window or a comment field. And I'm going to ask Fernanda to actually jump in and tell us what some of your what your answers are. So for the next 2 minutes, could you please write down in your chat window or comment field, for your product, describe your primary target in as few words as you can possibly use. Now, a single word is not good, like mainstream audience or everyone is not what I'm looking for. But if you can define your primary target customer for your product in as few words as you can, and then think of a second customer or user type. Perhaps there's one that your company doesn't pay enough attention to, and write that also next to your comment. So I'm thinking, if you write primary customer, write that name of the customer out, and then or the definition of the customer, and then secondary customer for your product, you write that customer out, and then write them both in the chat window. And I will continue presenting, but I'd like in one slide for Fernanda to jump on in and tell us what are some of the answers that we're seeing, and I will provide a couple of some feedback about what people are saying. Okay, so get going with that, and I will talk about the first question that's important to ask, and it's going to be a really obvious one. Who is your target customer? So by defining precisely for whom you're solving a problem, you can avoid producing a product that you think fits a lot of different types of customers or everybody. When you try to do a one-size-fits-all product, you aren't sensitive to your specific customers' preferences. You don't think about nuances of using your product. Perhaps, for example, your customer isn't as technically savvy as you think that as you would like them to be. So that changes how you actually ultimately solve the product or build the product. Secondly, you may create a product with just too many features, one that does nothing particularly well, rather than one that does a few things really, really well. By making sure you're understanding your target customer, you always have that particular person in mind whenever you're building, so you're not constantly just adding features. It allows you to make product decisions that favor your longer term customer goals. You start bringing the customer into the conversation as opposed to maybe optimizing for short-term business decisions. Or it allows you, particularly when you have a very strong stakeholder with a very specific need that they want to see in the product, or maybe it's a salesperson who who says this is something that we need to build, you can equip yourself with a tool to be able to push back and say, well, is that actually the right thing for this particular target customer? And it avoids also from you just going in and creating the product that you want because you mistake yourself as a good proxy for the customer. A couple of tips when you're actually looking at defining your target customer. You are likely to have multiple complementary customers. The exercise that you're doing right now, those of you that are doing it, are likely to find that, hey, we've got this one customer in mind. Usually it's maybe an economic buyer, or it might be a target customer that you talk about a lot. But if you really think about it, you actually have more stakeholders in your customer that are going to influence the decision about whether or not to buy your product. This can happen in enterprise customers, services. For example, the end user is often not deciding on whether or not to buy the product, but they ultimately have to use it. You may have decision makers like IT departments, or you might have HR departments that are going to decide whether or not the product is going to be purchased. You might have a champion, and you might also have people who are not very interested in your product, such as people who are concerned about rolling your product in the enterprise out for security needs or data issues. Each of these customers need to be defined, and you need to be able to speak to them in terms that make sense for them. It can also happen in consumer products. So in EdTech, which I work a lot, you tend to have the student, and you think about a lot about the student using the product. But particularly in, say, K-12, which is the primary school and the high school education, you have teachers, you have parents, you have principals, you have education departments, you have a whole host of other influencers who will ultimately decide whether or not your product's going to be used. And you need to define them as a target customer and be able to figure out how to empathize with them, figure out what their unique needs are, and solve those. For example, a student's need might be, I want to learn, but a teacher's need might be, I need to understand and control my class. A education department's need might be, I need data and I don't want to be spending a lot of money on lots of tools. You need to be able to answer those very differently. When you do define your customer, it's important to sub-segment them and define their attributes. What I mean by that is it's not sufficient to say that we're a product that serves all enterprises or all mainstream, or even if you do say something like our product targeted to lifelong learners, which is often, in my EdTech world, is a common target customer. It's too broad. You have to zero in and try to segment out what are the specific attributes of those customers. And then creating a persona allows you to really bring them to life. I'll show you a couple of examples of these in a second. These allow you to validate existing and prospective customers. You have a hypothesis about what these people are, and you bring them to life by actually talking about them as people. Here's an actual example of personas that I used at Masterclass. Don't worry too much about all of the specifics, but you can see we had quite a rich one-pager for 4 different personas, 3 which were actual target personas, 1 which was not, but was present on the platform still. We talked about what motivated them. We talked about what their barriers and pain points were, what kind of behaviors, learning behaviors they had, which were unique from persona to persona, and then what were the jobs to be done. What did they come to Masterclass to do? And just by glancing at these on the screen, you can see that they had very, very different jobs to be done. They had quite different motivations, and different kinds of behavior were manifesting themselves on the platform. For example, a lifelong learner would tend to look at many, many different categories and sample content and sort of go where there was some interest. So things like discovery experiences became much more important to prioritize. They tended to binge watch. Whereas a category, someone who was in love with a category, obsessed with a particular category like food or cooking, tended to go deep into a class, spend more time within each of the classes, finish the class from beginning to end, repeat lessons. They tended to practice and go over things again and again. Very different behaviors that we had to enable in our product. So, Fernando, what are some of the target customers that people are coming back with for their products and maybe their secondary customers? Maybe we just talk through three, if you could pick three, and I'll just talk about what I'm observing.
Okay, so Alan said that the primary customers are automotive salesmen, and the secondary is the car dealership manager. And then we have Jean, who said the primary are undergraduate students from STEM background, and the secondary are grant fund managers from non-profit organizations. And then we had the last one, third one. Diogo said the primary are L&D analysts in mid-sized business, and the secondary are employees looking for personal development. So there's a lot of changes around these personas, right?
Yeah, no. So what really strikes me, thank you for those, Fernanda. What really strikes me is you can kind of, although I may be struggling with the last one, but you can kind of see by just defining the customer, you can already sort of imagining the people who are the people who they're serving, the product that they might be actually trying, the problem they're trying to solve. You can get a sort of a sense out the gate just by defining the customer, what kind of challenges they're going to be running into. So auto salesman, I can imagine, is there's a small medium business service or product here that ultimately is enabling the people on the front line who are selling vehicles to do their job better. Whereas the dealer, they're ultimately trying to provide tools to run their dealership better, to presumably increase the aggregate sales and empower their salesmen. I'm imagining that the dealer is actually the economic decider on whether or not they're going to buy that product. So what the benefits you need to be able to explain to them is very different from presumably the end user, who's the salesman or salesperson who actually needs to have tools to enable them to manage the sale effectively. I can also imagine that they're motivated by making sure that they're going to hit their quotas. And so they're going to have concerns and questions about, will you actually help me hit my quota, or will this be a tool that makes this harder for me? Whereas the dealer is going to want good data on each of the salespersons, on which ones are actually doing well. And you can almost imagine the salespeople resisting that kind of thing because they're probably not wanting to have such transparency into their role. So there's lots of tension just by defining these two customers. I'm immediately seeing potential tension and potential ways that I need to speak to those customers in a very, very different way. In the other two, you can probably see very, very similar things. So we had undergraduate STEM, and then the fund managers for NGOs. I'm not entirely sure what that product is, but again, you can sort of see these undergraduate STEMs target audiences are going to definitely have very, very, very different needs. To be able to speak to the managers of these NGOs is going to have a very, very different kind of like message, a very different kind of, almost like a different product. This one almost sounds like there's some kind of marketplace at work, that they may be trying to match STEM to potentially NGO opportunities or something like that. So I can see straight away that this might be some kind of marketplace where you've got to be able to appeal to two sides and explain how bringing them together, how they're going to actually have a lot of benefits. So just to give you a sense of the importance of defining not just one target customer, but multiple target customers and how they might interact with each other. Now, I just totally guessed then. I might be wrong, but you can kind of see the power of just sitting down and being super clear on who your target customer is. I'll also mention that it's hard to describe them in 2 words. So you can probably think about, okay, well, I have my undergraduate STEM. But I would have a ton of questions. Like, are we talking about all undergrad STEM, or are we talking about only those in like 4-year courses at prestigious universities? Are we talking about those that may be at community colleges? Are we talking about aspirational STEM students, those that are about to enter college? Or are we talking about people who are about to graduate? Are we talking about specific fields within STEM? So you can see that you will need to sort of zero in on specific areas within your target persona to define more attributes about them. These may also be, there may be sort of demographic or psychographic attributes you need to zero in on. For example, that undergraduate STEM, all undergraduate STEMs may not be motivated to be matched up with the fund managers of these nonprofits, but there might be a certain segment that are more purpose-driven, for example. So you want to sort of start carving out like more behavioral or attributes about those customers that can actually talk to zero in on specific target customers, because undergraduate STEM is too big, too broad. I'll keep moving on. So I'm going to move into the second question now. I've got a very important observation of product management, and that is that we are generally problem solvers. We like to jump in, get something done, execute. We're high achievers. We like to get our hands dirty. We like to build. And that's a very admirable quality. The downside is we tend to jump into solution mode without really knowing the full scope of our challenge. We tend to have product ideas in mind, and often we're prescribed solutions or specific features that our stakeholders or our customers want. And we fall into this trap of getting into solution mode too early. Generally, the longer you stay in this problem space, understanding the core problem to be solved, the less likely you'll preemptively settle on a specific solution that actually does not achieve the goals. Of course, you don't want to fall into this analysis paralysis where you're constantly evolving, you're constantly trying to get more data to support what you're doing. But you need to have a very good understanding of the problem that you're proposing to solve, the hypotheses, long before you, and then to seek to validate these long before you actually settle on a specific solution. Otherwise, you've got a very good chance that you're going to miss the mark. And importantly, you want to come back into this problem mode on a very frequent basis, even as you're building a solution you've divided to do. So think about it as kind of like porpoising. I go in, I might go and feel a lot, or that convergent divergent thing that is in the design thinking. I want to come back out, even if I'm building a solution, every now and then, poke my head up and just say, do I know what problem I'm solving here? Have I prioritized the right features to actually solve that problem? Do I need to go and speak to some more customers to validate some assumptions that I'm now making? Maybe I wasn't aware of those assumptions at the beginning. Maybe I have some concerns that we're heads down building something. I've been motivating and getting my development team very excited about this, but maybe I need to check that it is actually going to do the trick. So it's important to constantly come back into that problem mode, and importantly, at the beginning, to stay in that kind of problem mode, that kind of intellectual curiosity, that willingness to be wrong, hypothesis-driven kind of mode for as long as possible at the beginning. And so that's the second question. In a concise, clear way, what problem are you solving for your customer? You want to make that in a short way that you can easily articulate that. This would be almost like a water cooler pitch or an escalator pitch, where you can say very, very succinctly, here's why we're solving this problem. The problem is ultimately the best problem statements are talking about what the problem is and the benefits that you're promising to deliver from your customers' terms. If you focus only on what this means to your business, you're likely to be falling into a trap of doing what your business wants, but not necessarily what your customer wants. Now, start with a meaningful problem statement. Make it very much about what it is that you're trying to solve, what data there is to support it, and be clear that it is actually worth solving. If you look at this sort of chart, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but on the left here, we actually have the Maslow hierarchy of needs. If you think about meaningful problems to solve, they should fall within one of these categories. It might be to build it might be to help people with their psychological basic needs. So help them feel better in their world, or provide, you think about even food delivery apps is really about like taking care of those psychological needs, all the way up to self-actualization, how to unleash creativity, how to help people live a more meaningful purpose. And there are so many layers in between. Every one of the products that is successful that come to mind can probably map to one or more of these tiers. Can your product? Are you solving a meaningful need, and can you articulate it in terms of an innate human need? And are you careful enough that you're not solving a problem that's simply a want? I want something is less compelling. You'll only ever find a niche audience. It's something that early adopters may love your product, but this may not translate into mainstream success. It's something that they may not pay a lot of money for. They may want it, but when the push comes to shove, are they going to spend money on it? Are they going to spend their time learning your product and using your product every single day? Probably not. Then you're probably in the want problem, and I recommend you go find a better problem to solve. Secondly, I recommend that you define 3-ish value proposition statements per target customer. So you can see I'm now structuring, if you have your problem statement, you've gone and defined your target customer. Now map back very specific value propositions that map back to the benefits that you're promising to deliver them. I won't go to too much detail about what these things look like, but they need to be relevant to the customer. They need to be in the customer's terms. They usually start with "you can" or "you will be able to." They're promises to the customer. If you look at this example here, this is another one from Masterclass. If you look at each of these sorts of student testimonials, you can very quickly understand the underlying problem that Masterclass is actually trying to solve, and it will be surprising, most likely surprising to you. If you just take a look at these and read these, you can probably see that Masterclass is not promising that you're going to become the world's greatest photographer, or that you're going to be able to cook like Gordon Ramsay. And it's not even promising that you're going to learn all of the skills of Gordon Ramsay. What it promises is that you're going to, and you can see this word appear in each of the student testimonials, we are going to unleash your creativity. We are going to inspire you and unleash your creativity. That is the core central promise of Masterclass. It is not you're going to learn everything that Gordon Ramsay can do. So you can often understand the value propositions just by reading what your customers are saying about your product and what you might want to say on your website. You can understand what your competitors are saying about their product by reading their website. You want to get to the essence of what is the promise and benefits that we're going to give to our customers. In the slides that I send you, there's a couple more examples there that we won't have time to cover today. I usually go through these in a detailed workshop, but there's an example there that highlights the value propositions for Airbnb and also shows you a simple way that you can actually build up to your own value proposition. So get a copy of the slides, look at the tools, and sort of try to apply them. Third question: how are your customers solving the problem today? This is where you want to understand their competitors and, importantly, their alternatives, and understand how well they're being served today. You want to obviously not take your competitors too seriously. I often find that people answer this question wrong. They start obsessing about their competitors and how to go head-to-head with the competitors. They start thinking about feature parity, How do I have all the same things that the competitors do? But that's not the important thing. The important thing to understand with competitors and alternative is, how do your potential customers solve their problem today? How poorly or well are the alternatives doing that for them? And where is your opportunity to do better? So you want to define your competitive set very broadly. You don't want to define just your direct competitors. For example, take a look at this list. Again, taking Masterclass as an example, we often talked about LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, Udemy, or some of the traditional schools that were coming online as our direct competitors. But if you think more broadly about what Masterclass does, it entertains, it provides inspiration, it had some level of access to world-class instructors. And so as a result, when you define the alternatives broadly enough, you start seeing other services as alternatives and potentially competitors, and certainly competitors to attention and time of our target audience that we need to take into consideration. So something even like Netflix, we're not going to obviously compete against Netflix for providing entertainment, but we have to be able to talk about why spending time with us is more valuable than just laying back on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and wasting an hour and a half on Netflix. It's kind of like, spend time with us, you'll be entertained and inspired and learn something. It's time well spent, not just time killed. Don't take competitors too seriously, but look to learn from them. I find some companies obsess about the competitive set, and I find other companies think, or founders think, I don't need to worry about competitors. All that matters is me just keeping an eye on how well we do. And you've obviously heard some of these stories about Steve Jobs, who says, I don't look at competitors, I only focus on my customers' problems and solving those, or I only focus on our innovation. That's all well and good, but it's not actually true. We must look at our competitors through the lens of our customers' choices. They're going to be faced with those choices. Am I going to do this product or use this product? And so you need to be able to come from their perspective and say, how do we fit in? How are we positioned differently? How do we solve the problem differently? How do we solve the problem better? How are we going to actually talk to them, our customers, either directly or indirectly through marketing, about why choose us? And so it is important to take the competitors seriously, but I find obsession is not going to get you anywhere, because ultimately what counts is focusing on your customers. As I also said, make any analysis you do actionable. Simply chasing parity is not helpful. All you'll do is end up with a laundry list of features and a lot of roadmap that looks like a dog's dinner without any focus, and you'll end up just doing things as well as your competitor. When I was working at a company called Ophoto, our key differentiation, which I'll get into in a minute, was quality of our products. We were doing photo prints, and we were really, really obsessed with, do we have the highest possible quality, the most beautiful merchandise? When people look at the prints that we send them or the photo books that we send them, do they get drawn in with the beauty and emotional joy of this beautiful product? So we spent a lot of time really obsessing about outperforming our competitors on quality. Whereas all of the other things that mattered, like shipping costs or price or the quality of the user interface or the time that it spent, like lots of editing features and things like that, we often just needed to be as good as our competitors or slightly better. Or in the case of editing features, we actually were a lot worse. We had a lot less features, a lot less advanced features. And that's because we were really focused on what was going to make us stand out in the market. And that leads me into the fourth question. What is unique in your approach to solving your customer's problem? This is your differentiator, or another term that's often used is your unique selling proposition that is a unique, sustainable, and substantive advantage. These can include all sorts of things. This can be that you have unique proprietary technology or infrastructure, or maybe it's content that only you have or can produce. That's actually a differentiator of Masterclass, content that only us that we could produce. Everybody has a learning platform. That's not where we were differentiating. It was the content on that platform that was unique. Maybe you have unique access to partners, suppliers, vendors. Maybe you have a large community of users, and so you're creating a network effect that even if your competitors were to go and build exactly the same product, your customers are not going to leave because there's value of just being with that community on your platform. There's stickiness. Maybe you have data about your customers that allow you to deliver an exceptional personalized experience. Maybe you've got a superior brand. Or maybe you have some expertise, or maybe you've got a seamless integration that allows for a one-stop shop that provides customers with this amazing convenience. These are all examples of differentiators. So think about what it is that you do differently, uniquely, and be sure that you can promote that and focus your roadmap on that. I'll give you a couple of examples. So if you look at Masterclass, I've kind of given it away. Can you guess what's the unique value proposition or the unique differentiator? It's not high quality content or a better technology platform, or it's not even that you're going to be able to learn all of these skills that you want to master in cooking or taking photography, for example. It is simply that you can learn from the best. Here's an example of 3 companies and their value propositions and a unique differentiator at the end. I mentioned Masterclass. Amazon should be an obvious one. They actually do have the largest selection and the lowest price. That's something that they're always trying, but they're not always the largest selection. You can't get everything there. And they're not always the lowest price for everything, but they almost without fault, differentiate themselves on the fastest and the easiest delivery and have optimized their experience around getting something delivered to you as quickly as possible. This is why they're investing in crazy things like drone delivery and pick up at universities and lockers and things like that, because they're really trying to differentiate themselves against getting to the product to you as conveniently as fast as possible. Some of you may have heard of the product, the Impossible Burger. It is a vegetarian burger. They have done everything that you would expect of a vegetarian burger. They've driven the price down so it's not too expensive. They're trying to make sure you get your protein and nutrition to the same quality of meat. And of course, it's not made from meat. So that's the ultimate thing about a vegetarian product. But what they've really focused on is making it as delicious as possible. They obsess about making something uncompromisingly delicious, and that it sizzles just like you would cooking meat. That they've gone and invested in the smell, so you can actually make sure that when you're cooking it, it feels like you're making meat. You can try to, your senses, taste senses and smell senses are responding the way you would with meat. And it actually, interestingly, bleeds while cooking because they've added heme protein. So they've obsessed about their differentiator in a way that truly does stand them out from the crowd in almost obsessive ways. That last column is where those individual products truly differentiate themselves. And my challenge is to you, what is your promise to your customer that truly differentiates yourself and allows you to stand above the crowd, number one, and number two, focus your organization on investing in the thing that's really going to make a difference and only doing as well as you need to on all the other stuff, which is a very good way of thinking about how to prioritize your roadmap. And then finally, I get asked this question all the time, which is, well, Ken, this is a lot of work. How do I avoid a huge, upfront, costly, time-burning effort when my organization is pushing me to focus on getting things shipped as quickly as possible, often with a big sense of urgency? And in many organizations, I've noticed that you end up with these departments called consumer insights or some other department that is charged with understanding the customer, and they might do 6-week-long kind of research assignments, and that absolutely has its place. I have a lot of respect for that doing that kind of deep dive research. At the same time, that's a lot of time invested. And so I recommend that product managers partner with their UX researchers, with their customer insights group, with their customer success groups and their stakeholders. And instead of seeing this as a big upfront one-time effort, they see it as a fast draft, if you will, a hypothesis that they create first. Those personas that I showed you about Masterclass iterated many times. And the first time we did it, we built based on only the information that we had available to us. So we didn't have to go and spend a lot of time trying to learn things. We needed to make decisions now and quickly. So we created a draft, and then we sought to iterate and evolve that over time. So far from seeing it as a one-off time costly effort, you see it as an ongoing living process that you're constantly understanding more and more about your customer and adding to that body at work. Now, that has an important implication, which means at any point in time, there's a ton of things you actually don't know yet. And so it's important, as your fifth question, to always keep a list, and I actually suggest you literally have a list of the different risks and assumptions that you don't yet know enough about that you will need to test over time, evaluate, potentially mitigate. And this is the fifth and final question to ask, and make sure that you about your customer. And that's literally like, what don't we know about our customer's problem or about our customer yet? This is a great way of helping prioritize early discovery efforts. So if you identify a risk about your customer, about a new problem that you're trying to solve, it can help you say the very first thing we do when we start actually doing our research or starting to build or validating is to build a prototype, or to go and do that research and interview our customers to understand more about that risk and assumption. And I use the word risks and assumptions very, very clearly, because risks are obviously those that you might think are going to happen to you. They're things that are competitive risks, maybe outside of your control. That is true. But assumptions are also things that you might have assumed will happen that become kind of like overlooked later on. And so your assumptions might be, will my customers actually pay this amount of money for it? I'm going to make that assumption that they will, but I need to obviously come back and test it later. Risk, by also documenting explicitly these risks and assumptions, you set yourself up to communicate very well with your decision makers, so your stakeholders are very comfortable with you taking those risks, and those are explicit. So you focus on those not readily in your control. You want to prioritize those critical risks and sort of talk, it's not just enough to identify the risk, but talk about what you're going to do about it. If you're not going to do anything about it yet, that's fine. Say, I'm going to respond to the risk later and in this way, or I'm going to wait to mitigate it. And these are the high priority risks I'm going to work on now. And you want to, as I was saying, revisit this whole thing on a frequent basis. So as my final wrap up to this presentation, let me show you what our list of risks and assumptions were at Masterclass. And this is not uncommon for a startup company. You would have, I'll just show you this list. I won't necessarily talk through them. But we had these risks laid out, and well before my time of joining the company, the founder was very adamant about stepping through each of these assumptions and really understanding answers and focusing product and content development behind testing these risks and building a certain degree of confidence that they're actually going to be risks that won't undermine the company. If you found a big problem, we can pivot. If you don't actually focus on testing and validating your assumptions as you go, you're likely to fail. And so that's it. The 5 questions to define your customer. I promised you can get a copy of this slides. We will distribute them out to everybody. That was about 50 minutes. So I do appreciate your investment of time, actually about 45 minutes. Thank you for your investment of time in the presentation today. We will now do Q&A. I also welcome you to check out the Influential Product Manager. Locally, you can purchase it at one of your e-commerce stores. Sorry, I've forgotten the exact name of the store, but it is at that bit.ly link, or you can purchase from Amazon. It comes in the paperback, audio book, PDF, Kindle version. So we've got everything for everyone. If you have trouble finding a copy for any reason, please reach out and contact me. Or if you just want to learn more about me or the work I'm doing, or watch another presentation on another topic, please visit the influentialpm.com, or feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. I welcome all industry professionals who want to just network with me, and happy to answer questions there. You can also email me. And that's it for my talk. Thank you.
All right, so I'm back. Thanks, Ken. Thanks again for your time, for the talk. I think it was very rich content for everyone. And yeah, my first question would be in regards to the presentation, because someone from the audience asked if you were going to share the slides. So we have this answer already. So we will make sure to include the link into the description here on YouTube. So whoever wants to get access to it later, you can go ahead and reach it over there. Okay, so let's get to the Q&A. We have some questions here from the audience, and I'll put some for us to talk about. So I'll start with this one from Fabio. So he asks, how many customer interviews should a PM participate on a monthly basis?
I get this question all the time, and I wish there was like a magic answer to it. But I actually do have an answer to it. So, you know, funny enough, because I do talk about this in the book. The first thing is I'm not naive and think that you can spend all of your time on this, right? You can't spend all your time talking to customers and not really get anywhere. But I'm still shocked at the number of PMs who've rarely, or if never talked one-on-one with customers in sort of those sort of interviews, or they've only participated in formal structured interviews that were run by their UX group. You cannot get a empathetic understanding of your customer without doing your own primary outreach, interviewing, discussion, informal and formal discussion with your customers. And you will not get anywhere if you only focus on testing your solutions or testing the things that you already have in mind. It's this open-ended kind of like discussion around who are you, what are the problems, can I observe you in your environment? That's where I find that product managers in particular get these massive insights. And there's a good reason. Product managers are meant to be finding problems to solve. UX is meant to be validating solutions, or consumer insights is meant to be understanding kind of broad market opportunities and consumer patterns at mass. But it's only when you kind of watch a struggle of an individual customer that you can often pinpoint what is the issue that they're struggling with, or can you build stories that you can bring back to your team to describe the emotion and the problems, and you have this narrative that really connects the work you're doing to the value that you're bringing to individuals. So what's the magic number? So I like to keep it lightweight because everything I just talked about is hard enough. So I like to say, for a consumer organization, try to schedule some kind of regular cadence where your customers are just going to appear on a weekly, or if that's not possible, a bi-weekly basis, and a good target number is 5. So this is a consumer app. You spend half an hour with them. You don't do a ton of upfront planning, like building all these prototypes or anything. It's sort of like issue of the day, or I just want to have a conversation. You structure it, so you script it somewhat, so you have some key questions, and maybe you pick an issue that you need to make a decision soon. It's surprising because 5 customers can really just give you little nuggets that help you feel more confident about a decision you're just about to take. Now, the magic of this is 5 times 50 or 5 times 25. By doing that over a year, you've spoken to so many customers. Each one of those interviews by itself has not been very valuable, but you've gleaned these little tiny nuggets. You've not over-planned, so you've not invested like half your week planning for each of those, because if that happens, you'll never do it. And you just have these conversations. And the thing about 5 is you'll invite 5, 4 will turn up, and 3 will be useful. Who cares? 1's not useful. Next week, we're going to talk to 5 more, or in 2 weeks, we're going to talk to 5 more. So that's a really good cadence to do. And that's half an hour. I mean, that's not, I used to set up a user testing Thursdays. And each Thursday afternoon, that would happen. And various product managers would come and talk to our customers, and we would just sort of glean some information, and we would sort of do a lightweight kind of report out, and that was it. That's not a lot to ask to invest. Now, enterprise is a little bit more challenging. You often need to set up like visits. You need to take your salesperson. You need to structure that a little bit more. So rather than thinking about it in terms of how to do that more frequently, it's like do that like twice a month maybe. Make each visit really count. So structure a little bit more. Make sure you're speaking to multiple users within that client. If you're going on site, make sure you speak to the economic buyer, an end user, a decision maker. And remember, it's not a sales pitch. So you're not there to try to help sell. If you're doing that, you're not actually doing that research. So that's a different kind of mode. So you spend a little bit more time on each of those, but you're doing it a couple of times a month. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm on mute. This usually happens on some meetings, but okay. So I will jump to a question from Fernanda, since I believe it's related to your question, which is in regards to how to create a balance, right, between discovery and doing discovery, performing those interviews, and all the other work that PMs have on a daily basis, weekly basis of doing delivery and many other things. So yeah, I think the question is how to balance, right? How to balance that.
Yeah, I kind of touched on that at the end a little bit. And the intent was to sort of preempt that question a little bit. But to elaborate a little bit further, the key is to iterate in and use the best available information, and to revisit on a somewhat frequent basis, like monthly or so, or every time you do a round of interviews, come back and like refresh your thinking. Earlier on, you're going to have a lot more assumptions. That's actually a really important signal. That's when you probably need to do more discovery work up front. It is part of the development process. That's the key to communicate to your stakeholders. If you can go and build something, but we don't know A or B, and we need more information on A or B before we can kind of get there. You can do prototyping, so you can kind of start evolving the solution at the same time as getting just sufficient to empower you to go and like validate that. And if you throw that away, you've not wasted a whole lot of effort. So it's largely about selling your organization on the value of doing it, and then finding creative ways to do it more incrementally, more iteratively, and kind of in tandem with wherever you are in your development process. So whatever you're building kind of can be kind of reusable in some respects. I have some people who say you shouldn't reuse prototypes and things like that, but maybe you should. Maybe if the prototype is validated, it's a great living set of requirements for your team, and maybe you can reuse some of it. So that's kind of the way I would try to tackle it. But if you're just focusing on delivery, you really have to explain to your stakeholders, I can focus on delivery, which means that I'm building the product right. We don't know whether we're building the right product. What's worse, wasting 20% of my time on that, on discovery, or wasting, on average, 40% of time of every development cycle. Right, that's kind of the extremes, obviously. But if you can get a better decision around things, why not would you value that? So I think bringing opportunity cost into the discussion is another technique.
Sounds good. I will pick this one from Jean here. He asks, so he's a lecturer at UC Davis in the design department.
Wow.
And
out of the UC club.
And he asks, how is the best way to introduce this mindset to students starting to learn UI and UX?
I'll tell you exactly what I do. You may agree, you may disagree. There's a lot of tools out there, right? And I think teaching the theory and teaching the tools is very, very important. I introduce them by throwing them in the deep end. There's nothing quite like, whether it be students or whether it be my, my set of, earlier stage product managers, like associate product managers, by actually getting them to engage firsthand with customers and coaching them a little bit about like some fundamentals in terms of things like how to run a good interview, how to ask open-ended questions, giving them some tips about like how to not guide or lead the user through that. But what I always find time and time again is when they apply themselves to this, the first learning moment is, wow, I'm really bad at this. I need to get better at it. The second thing is they walk away feeling pumped, absolutely energized. Even if those interviews didn't go so well, it's like, wow, there's a real problem here. There's a real user here. There's really something that I can do. And that energy level comes back. That empathy and the things that they saw become stories. And so that's that time and time again, just that exposure has meant that that will start to build that mindset because they see the value very quickly and they realize that they're bad at it, so they need to get better at it. I also do some other techniques, like whenever something is being proposed, I'll sort of have my kind of 5 why questions ready to go. So why would you do that? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the target customer? What is the evidence you have from that target customer that is going to support you? And sort of by pulling them back from a good idea, sort of working back from the solution back up to the problem statement, is just a good technique to always sort of like be pushing them to introduce that trigger, that learned behavior of like, I need to come back up to what, why and who am I using this for? So as coaches, as leaders, as managers, being very deliberate in constantly doing that reinforces that mindset a little bit. So I don't know, John, if that actually answers your question. I'd actually love if you could type in the comments your tips on how to expose them to the UI UX mindset. You are a lecturer, so you've probably been through this as well. I'd love tips, but I have literally a whole assignment for my students where they stop and go out and have to do 5 interviews, and they always come back exhausted and super excited with lots of insights. And many of them realize, wow, my idea was crap. I've got to go do something else.
Cool. So we have some other questions here in regards to the interviews themselves, so how to do it. So Gabriel here asks about team members. So in which situations you should bring someone from other teams to conversations with customers, and what team members should you bring for each situation? Which ones are more important, and so on.
Great question, Gabriel. It's very intuitive, very insightful of you to sort of see that there are very many different situations in which you need to sort of be thoughtful about what that means for your stakeholders. So I guess I'll give you 2 extremes. The first is talking to lost customers These are customers that have churned or customers that failed to purchase the product. And the big sensitivity is going to be your sales team, because talking to those customers, they're going to be resistant generally to talking to those customers, because they're worried that you're going to evaluate their ability to manage objections and sort of convince customers on things. They're also likely to default to, oh, it's all about price. If you just lower the price, we'd be fine, right? So they're going to want to leverage the situation a little bit to sort of make their job a little bit easier. And you're actually literally going to have to say, no, my job is not to make it easier. My job is to understand why we lost the customer from what were the product objections to this. So in that situation, you really have to talk to your sales team member before talking to the customer. First of all, they'll often block you from even knowing which customers you should talk to, and they're often the only ones that can make the introduction. So it takes a fair degree of practice to talk to them and explain, why do I need to talk to them? How is this going to benefit you in the future? And how am I going to make sure this is about product and not about other things, price, sales process, your failure. And importantly, the sale is already dead. We're not going back in there to try to revive things. I'm not going to come along for this as this last-ditch effort to try to get you to revive a long-dead sale. And so that's one situation in which you really need to figure out how to involve your team members. And the key there is you need their buy-in. You often need them to assist you. If they don't help you, move to the next one. Be persistent, because if you're not talking to customers that have stopped using your product, you have survivor bias in your research. If you're only talking to customers that love your product and are using it every day, you're not getting the full picture. So you have to be persistent. But the key there is buy in, get them on board, and then lay out the rules of engagement and then invite them at their option. Do you want to join or not? But the rule of engagement is, we're not going to try to revive the sale. I'm not going to make promises to put something on the roadmap to try to, sweeten them. And I'm not going to make short-term promises or anything I need to commit to. And we're not going to, when the conversation borders on something other than product, I'm going to bring back to the core issues we need to address. So that's one. Now the second, and by the way, in those cases, if you do talk to them independently, the salesperson, so long as the salesperson's on board, that's actually a great situation. Now let me cut to another extreme. When should you go out of your way to involve other team members, even though you shouldn't, even though you don't need to, right? So you might have a perfectly good one-on-one conversation set up with a customer. Look at your team's motivation. Look at your developers' engagement with the problem that they're solving. If they're very much like wanting a lot of prescriptive requirements, if they're kind of like bored, or if they're kind of like constantly pushing back on, why are we even building this? I don't even know, why I should bother. Or if they're just kind of lethargic, not seeming very motivated, it can be very motivational to bring developers, design team members, and other members of your team along to participate. And in that case, you need to be, again, very clear on their role. Usually, please be note taker is a great way of making sure they're focused on writing rather than like interrupting. And then sort of to really engage them around, what did you learn? What did we see? Now, what I often find is they come back to the group pretty excited, or absolutely like, oh my gosh, the customer can't even use the product that I've been building. I'm going to go fix that. So one of the two things where they're just really super like, they've developed empathy. And that's a situation where you go out of the way to actually bring other team members in, even if you don't need to, or it's not going to help you immediately in your research efforts.
I'm on mute again. Sounds good. So another one here from Yuri about scripts. So is there some sort of script? I think that will also depend on the circumstance as you're talking. So it could be an addition from your previous answer. So
Yep.
is there any script? So how to obtain more accurate answers from customers?
Yes, I in the book, chapter 5 is completely dedicated to empathetically doing discovery work and sort of interviews in a way that actually achieves the kind of goals that I've been talking about. And I have a framework here, which I welcome you to have a look at. Oops, see if I can get that right. I call it the onion model. I kind of built it myself, but the key bottom line of the onion model, if you will, is you want to start very broad, understanding more about them first, understanding more about the problem, observational, getting them to talk about the problem. How they solve it today is the third layer. Then the fourth layer is here's what we are, and here's the product. What do you think it does? So you don't tell them what it does. You don't even tell them what you solve. You see whether or not they instantly recognize the value that your product can kind of bring and the problem that you can solve. And then and only then would you actually get into here's a specific goal that I want you to achieve using my product. If you do it the other way around, you lose all of that beautiful opportunity to context. Yeah, if you put them in a context where they know who you are, what you're trying to do, and what problem you want them to talk about, they're going to index on that. You're going to lose all this wonderful opportunity just to learn more about them. So that's kind of the order. And then I do have an example script. You can see that on influentialpm.com. I actually put that script up there. It's about 10 questions. The UXers of the group are going to think it's pretty naive and pretty simple. The product managers of the group who've never done this before are going to find it like, wow, that's a perfect tool. So it's meant to be like in the mindset of, I want to give you a tool that you can just pull out, use. If it works for you, it works for you. You don't have to overthink it. Lightweight. So there is actually a script that I've designed, and that's up there. And there's an example there for, I think, a product that I mentioned in the book, and also an interview script for Masterclass. Now, it's not the world-class best script, but it definitely helps you maintain an open, the open questions, keeping that kind of intellectual curiosity, probing, avoiding telling the user what you want to hear, biasing. Like, there's ways you can ask questions, like, how good do you think this product is very different than saying, even like, what are some of the things you like about the product? What are some of the things you don't like about the product? Can you force rank them? There's just different techniques that you can use. That's even a poor example. But if you inadvertently lead them, they'll give you the answer not to hurt your feelings, right? So yeah, it's all there.
Awesome. Yeah. In the end, it's more about technique and how to make the questions than the script itself, right? So there are some tips and tricks in how to make questions in a way that you don't bias, right? Don't create any bias from the customers.
Yeah.
Okay, I will pick the last one here since we are almost at the end of the event. I picked another one from Fabio here, which is more related with the company itself. So if you are in a big or multi-product company, how to make sure that the 5 questions converge for everyone, for all teams? I think that, in my interpretation, I think that applies from multiple product teams, but also how does that apply to other teams, and how to avoid to have 500 different answers?
Yeah, it again is another great question. I think there's some context here that I need to sort of talk about. I am not trying to do this universally across a whole company, particularly one with multi products. I don't think it works, and I think also any product manager that thinks that they can achieve consensus across the board, you're fooling yourself. The best you can do is get influence and alignment. Alignment is, as the book cover suggests, that's alignment. But fish are swimming in different directions and they're all over the place, right? But they're, at least they're going in the same direction. That's kind of the mindset you should have about these tools help me pick off stakeholders, teams I need to work with, and just nudge them along in alignment towards a better understanding of what is it we're actually trying to do and for whom. And so you're not going to get the convergence that I think you might be looking for, and particularly you won't get that across the company, number one. Number two, maybe you don't need to. Maybe what's really important is the product that you're working on, that the team that you're working with, they have a common purpose and a common understanding of, at least within their world, the context. In fact, that's very important, because if you try to do it too expansively, then you're going to come up with very high level answers like, we solve all financial challenges for Fortune 500 companies. That's not useful to guide your product development. So you probably need to narrow in on, I'm on this particular product or this particular like problem or part of the bigger problem that we're trying to solve, and my product area solves that specific problem for these specific customers. And that's where you need the detail, and you need the alignment in a relatively small number of people to do that. And if you have 500 answers, so long as there's some level of consistency, and this is kind of has to come from the top, your CPO, for example, that there's some higher level like vision and clarity about the goals of the company, the purpose of the company, and how the product portfolio kind of fits together, you should be okay. But even if you don't have that, do this, because at least you can get some kind of buy-in and alignment with the team that you immediately work with.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it. Let me bring Fernanda here as well to wrap it up. So thanks again, Ken, for your time, for your availability, for the content.
You're more than welcome. And please, again, that the website we put in there, if you wish to LinkedIn with me, it's just LinkedIn/in Ken Sande. And I noticed Jean is Jean or Jean, who asked one of the questions. He told me he's teaching 2 classes on this. So Jean, please get in touch with me at my email address, kenjsande@gmail.com. I would love to hear more about your classes and see your content. So, and for that matter, anyone, if you've got any other questions, please reach out.
Thank
awesome.
you. This was very enriching for all of us. Thanks once again for the opportunity. And thanks everyone who stuck with us until the end. And hopefully we'll see you in the next Meet Product Tank Brazil or local chapter. So follow all of us just in case. So we'll see you on the next meetup.
Right, and thanks also for all the product tanks that helped with the promotion. Fernanda as well for hosting the event with me today. So thanks again, everyone, and that's it. Have a nice one.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.